All right, Joey, let's focus on the linebackers now. And I think this is kind of a group that even during the Lovie Smith era and Tim Beckman and Bill Cubitt era, Illinois had a pretty solid stream of good linebackers. I wouldn't say great linebackers, but Delshon Phillips was a really good player that's kind of stuck in the NFL. Jake Hansen, really good player, made some big plays, who's stuck in the NFL. Dele Harding was a really productive linebacker for Illinois. And then last year, you get Isaac Darkangelo, and Tarique Barnes has been just a really solid, reliable linebacker in the middle. And while this isn't a group that I feel like we think is a high ceiling group, at least that we think of right now, I don't have a ton of questions about it. Like, so before we dive, like, it's just a group that I think is solid. That makes sense?
Yeah, it does. Tarique Barnes does a lot of that. I don't think I would have that feeling if you were going into this season with Dylan Rosiek and Kenenna Odeluga as your two starters, just because they don't have the experience, as much experience as Tarique Barnes. Tarique Barnes just feels like a really good one. We know he's a good player, but like I know where the floor is with Tarique Barnes of this position group because they don't play with three linebackers. It's generally two. And if one of those is him, I feel like you're going to get a position group that's not going to make a lot of mistakes, going to make some plays. Watching Tarique Barnes blitz some of those counts is very nerd fun. It's very, very fun to watch that.
Joe is a linebacker, loved to time up the snap count.
What did you not play? Look at you, man. You've been an offensive lineman.
Dude,
were you a Pee-wee quarterback? Please tell me you were.
I was.
Of course you were.
Terrible.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Terrible arm, but I knew the position. The smart kid. At least I like to think myself as one. I need some
of your old coaches to give a scouting report on you.
Well, here's the thing. Unlike all these guys we're talking about, my linebacker timing up the blitzes peaked at sophomore year. I had a game, I think a second half where I had 4 tackles for loss. It was my Al Bundy game, but it was just timing up that cadence. I figured out the guy's cadence, and boy, I was laying some hits, Joey. But
did everyone get too big for you your junior year?
No,
they just couldn't.
They realized I was not athletic enough or fast enough to run sideline to sideline. You get me between the C gaps, I'm really good. You try to get me you stretch me out like Wilmington did back in the day, man. And no, that was not good for me. Not good for me. Anyway, the storyline of the Illinois outside or inside linebackers is they got to replace 2 of the 3 rotation players. Tarique Barnes is back, steady, reliable, 2-time team captain now. Tarique Barnes, but Isaac Darkangelo was a huge story last year that seemed to really build steam late. Like he played his best football late because Calvin Hart Jr. was not his same self, or at least the one guy we saw for 3 quarters against Nebraska, who's this big play machine. He just didn't make big plays, but Darkangelo was really productive. I think he had 9.5 tackles for loss, great sideline to sideline speed, led the team in tackles despite only playing half the snaps. He was a really big player. So while I don't know how much we talked about him enough or if fans knew him a lot, they loved him. And he's in an NFL training camp right now. I think he's in his 3rd NFL training camp. So he's showing something in these preseason games that teams are interested in. I still think he's got a chance to latch on as a special teamer at some point. So he's not easily replaced. And Calvin Hart was a guy who had a lot of experience at this level.
Yeah, we talk about Dylan Rosiek and the coaching staff. Remember how high they were on Darkangelo last preseason. And I remember thinking, okay, I guess this is awfully high praise for somebody who the walk-on linebacker never really found his way on playing on the defensive side. He was a good special teamer. You hear a lot about that. Obviously, Dylan Rosiek's not a walk-on, but you hear a lot of that same confidence, which is different. Like we saw Kenenna Odeluga play defensive snaps last year. So I'm saying Rosiek because I kind of get similar vibes just in the way that they describe like his growth and where he's at and what he can bring. Like he seems to me to be somebody who could follow a similar path. I'm not saying he's going to lead the team in tackles. I did call up an activity we did earlier this summer, and I wanted to bring that up again later on in this to see if we still agree with our picks.
Yeah.
But it seems like it's Dylan Rosiek, it's Kenenna Odeluga, and Tarique Barnes. Like those to me are the top 3. And those are 3 guys who I just don't you have questions because you haven't seen the last two, right? You haven't seen Rosiek and Odeluga much. But I think Andy Boo's under benefit of the doubt here.
He's a good coach. Now Andy is an eternal optimist, right? Like whenever he talks with us, he loves all his guys. But I think he's the Dark Angel thing, especially because I was a little skeptical of that, but they kept talking about him like he was going to be an impact player, and he was. And at the same time last year during training camp, I'm talking 2022, I asked him about Dylan Rosiek and Kenenna Odeluga, and he said, I think they could play for us right now. Like if we had to go to them, I would feel confident. And he continues to say that. So they are expressing that. And Bielema said it too. Like I feel good about those guys. And the one thing is they have both played significant football. Odeluga was a pass rush specialist in their dime package last year, but he played a bunch of snaps. What it was 100 plus snaps last year. And he was a special teamer almost on all the special teams. Dylan Rosiek, the last couple of years, has been on all of their special teams. And he got on the field last year for about 55 snaps. It's not a bunch, but he did look the part. And then this is the big question, right? Can they be upgrades? I don't know if they'll be upgrades, but I saw Rosiek in the spring in these spring scrimmages, Joey, and he was starting alongside Barnes, and Odeluga would come in too. I don't know who ends up being the other starter next to him, but the sideline to sideline speed and most of all, like the feistiness, like he would hit people and kind of skirmish with him a little bit. There's an attitude about Dylan Rosiek, and we expect him to be a Mike linebacker. He said that's my thing. That's what I'm doing. So he admitted he's playing Mike. But he's got that Jake Hansen kind of feistiness to him. I know they grew up together and the families are really close, both from the same high school, but he's got that feistiness and sideline to sideline speed that reminds me of that. And given that he's a redshirt sophomore who's played meaningful football, like this is kind of how it works. This is kind of how it should work in programs is these guys get on the field in one role. They get a whole spring, whole off season to work into that starter role. And here he is. And here's Kenenna Odeluga, who's playing the will linebacker, which is basically like the edge. Remember we saw CJ Hart on the edge and we're like, some people were like, is he playing outside linebacker? No, it's will linebacker. But Kenenna's kind of got that bend, that really great action figure physique. And he's a really, really smart kid. So both those guys, I got confidence that they're going to be all right there.
Yeah, we saw Kalen Tolson play a similar role to that at that back in 21, who also had an action figure body type like Kenenna Odeluga has. I'm glad you mentioned that about Dylan Rosiek, because if you remember, Brett Bielema's first spring here, he did recruit Dylan Rosiek. He was a guy who was in that awkward recruiting class, and he said, this kid's kind of a firecracker out here. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. Pocketed away. And I asked Dylan Rosiek last week, I said, what do we think he meant by that? He goes, I probably hit someone in a way I shouldn't have. And
he remembered it, yeah.
Yeah, and he probably shouldn't have done that. But, like, it's kind of in his DNA, I guess is the point I'm trying to make. Like, he is a feisty kid which that's not to say he's unhinged, but you want people to play with that fire, right?
As a linebacker in the Big Ten going up against Braylon Allen, yeah, you better be a little unhinged.
Yeah, that's fair. I think this has kind of been building with him for a while. And remember, Kenenna Odeluga was the first guy outside of McCray. McCray was Brett Bielema's first, and he'll tell you that. He'll tell you he was kind of a one-man band calling up some old friends back in college football.
Calling up Jack Daniels.
That's exactly who he called, isn't it?
Not call people. Yeah, he was actually Jack Daniels.
No. That's the Florida coach.
I thought he called Jack and he talked about, you're right.
I think that was Gabe. I think that's how he found Gabe.
That's Gabe.
But he called someone. He called someone he knew from his past, because that's what – at any rate, Kenenna Odeluga wasn't far behind. He was headed for the Ivy League. Brett Bielema liked what they saw from his Mount Carmel, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, they liked what they saw. He was a running back. He was a do-it-all linebacker. They really, really loved him. I think when they got to know him, they obviously loved him more. Like, he was a guy they identified early, too. And then he and Dylan Rosiek kind of came up together in all of this. And I know you did a story, Jeremy, on that and what it was like for both of those two. But I think you nailed it earlier when you said this is what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Like, we're talking about things that should happen in college football in terms of timelines and natural, projecting. This is what it is supposed to be. And Illinois is doing things that it's supposed to do.
You're not supposed to start 17 freshmen. Right? Like that's not how it's supposed to work in these healthy programs. Like Matthew Bailey, like he's injured now, but getting in a role, finding a way to help the team, Xavier Scott coming in when you need to come in, and then you build on that the next year. Like that's how it's supposed to work. And these guys kind of fit that to a T. So yeah, I think they got a lot of confidence in Dylan Rosiek. And listen, I don't know if these guys are going to be stars, but I think they're going to be productive players of the defense. I don't have huge questions about them because they don't seem to have big questions about them. So listen, I didn't think Calvin Hart was great last year. And Dylan Rosiek beat him out, right? Like that became pretty clear. Kenenna Odeluga might have beat him out. But both these guys are going to play a lot because Darkangelo played 384 snaps last year. Calvin Hart played 383, right? So they're going to rotate these guys in. Both these guys are going to play significant roles. So whether it's Odeluga or Rosiek that starts, I think both these guys are going to be really important parts of the defense.
You couldn't agree more. Like they don't play three linebackers often together, but this is a 3 linebacker rotation. They have 3, I think in their eyes, 3 starting linebackers in the same way that we talked about the outside linebackers. And these guys are going to be out there a lot. I expect Tarique Barnes to play a ton of snaps and those 2 to fill in. And there's some versatility there too, right? I think Tarique Barnes can play that will if you want Dylan Rosiek at Mike, or you can have Kenenna Odeluga will with Tarique Barnes at Mike. Like they do this in a way that they want that versatility because it unlocks combinations for them and they recruit to that. So yeah, and I think, I don't know, we'll get to it. I know it's our next. I actually have the
Let's go into it. The depth chart.
The rundown.
Who's
I
next?
think Josh Kreutz is the wild card here because Brett Bielema.
I do this too. It's James Kreutz.
Well, Josh Kreutz is the offensive line wild card. We talked about that.
I tagged the James Kreutz picture as Josh Kreutz the other day. So
gosh darn it.
Don't worry about it.
Well, James Kreutz is a wild card here because Brett Bielema, I remember last year, I think it was the middle of the season, he was talking about his linebackers and he said, everybody in the building knows the head coach really likes James Kreutz. And they really like James Kreutz. And I think they kept James Kreutz hidden for as long as they could keep him hidden, as much as you can keep a productive player in Chicagoland hidden, we should also add. And for a reason, they like him. He's very long. He's like +6 in terms of arm span to height. He is violent. Like they are a big fan of him, and Brett Bielema goes out of his way to bring up James Kreutz quite a bit.
Yeah, and it sounds like he's the 4th linebacker. I think he's the backup to Rosiek and Barnes at the middle linebacker, so maybe he's the 3rd option there or whatever, but he's right behind those guys. I think he's what Rosiek was last year, special teams core guy, and if he's got to come in, and then it's going to be James Kreutz's turn next year when Tarique Barnes. So this is what you want. 2 years of building up his strength and contributing on special teams. He played a couple games last year. They got him his feet wet on the field a little bit. And then Ryan Mead's a name we got to mention because we saw him playing that will spot because he was basically on the edge during the spring scrimmages, and he was disruptive. He had a couple big plays, a fumble recovery. He was always around the quarterback. I think that said a little bit about the lack of offensive line depth with a few injuries at tackle, but he's another core special teamer that maybe he's the 5th or 6th linebacker here, Joey, but he's a guy I want to mention because I could see him getting on the field for some snaps.
I can too, and he's very important special teams wise. Robbie Disher praises him. Seems like linebacker and special teams are very married together, especially for some of these guys early on. So I'm glad you mentioned him. I think he's a guy that a lot of people look to. I think his voice matters, especially in that linebacker room. He's been around forever. So, yeah, I think he's somebody you could see out there in the mix. And James Kreutz is a guy who is he could probably eviscerate somebody on a punt coverage this year. Like he would be, if you had to pick somebody on the roster who's going to be like that hit, he would probably be that guy for me.
All right. Let's just mention the other guys that are scholarship guys. JoJo Hayden, dude, he looks the part. Great athlete. I think he's going to be Screams will. We talked about could he be a 3-4 outside linebacker. I think that will position is exactly what they want. Malachi Hood's probably a little bit of both, but a great athlete. Sounds like he's got some development to do though, because he was a DB and running back in high school at Joliet Catholic. But they like Luke Zardzin, an experienced walk-on behind them. I just know Andy Boo really, really likes his room.